And it seems to me as if you remain a believer, a Muslim believer, that it becomes very hard to argue with the concept of God or to argue with the moral guide of Islam. I mean, the two gentlemen sitting here tonight demonstrate that. The Quran is forever perfect. Everybody else has misunderstood it. Those of us who criticize it have misunderstood it. Those who act according to the violent passages have misunderstood it. And if you become an atheist, then you can do that without flinching. But today, I've been following events since the Arab Spring, and I see grassroots movements, women that organize themselves in the various countries who are fighting for their rights, homosexuals who organize themselves, ex-Muslims. Majid, what is your status? Sort of almost ex-Muslims.
I've just been excommunicated.
Almost ex-Muslims. So there are grassroots.
You're trying to get me killed or what?
Well, I mean, I'm really happy with your evolution. We debated 3 years ago, and what you said tonight and what you were saying 3 years ago are quite different. And it's an evolution that I'm happy with. But there are these. There are these seemingly small groups, but they're a growing number of people. And I think, in a way, it is good that we no longer need, and I really mean respectfully, that the House of Islam is no longer going to rely on the clergymen and Muslim scholars to advance the quality of their lives and to live according to their consciences. People are taking that opportunity themselves. And it's only a matter of time before either there is a pure reformation or the majority of Muslims will be ex-Muslims. My father, the man responsible for my education, taught me that Islam, rightly understood, is a religion and philosophy of peace. In fact, he said that for any society to be peaceful and prosperous, it had to institute the rule of God, or Sharia. I came to disagree with my father. It was a gradual process that started when I entered and lived in societies such as the Netherlands and the United States that applied man-made constitutions and laws. Both countries are peaceful and prosperous. I now disagree even more with my father that Islam is a religion of peace. When I look at the amount of security that is deployed tonight here, the amount of security that is deployed for the Richmond Marathon. 6 months ago, the Boston Marathon was bombed by two brothers who invoked the founding documents and the founding father of Islam. I disagree with my father when I look at the wanton killing of the Westgate Mall in Nairobi by Somali men invoking Allah and Muhammad to justify their horrid act. Kenya is the most hospitable country to Somalis fleeing their own country. So it distresses me even more. I disagree with my father when I look at the reports this week of 30 men and women worshipping in Iraq who are killed by a suicide bomber invoking the very same God and the very same prophet that they invoke. I disagree with my father when he says that Islam is a religion of peace. When I look at the 120,000 dead in Syria, Syria is now a stage of a proxy war between Islam's two most important and most influential nations, the Sunni Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Shia Islamic Republic of Iran. I disagree with my father that Islam is a religion of peace when I read about the almost daily reports of the destruction of churches, the pillaging of Christian property, the rape of Christian women, the terrible exodus of Christians and other religious minorities from Muslim countries. All this is done by men who invoke the founding father and founding documents of Islam. I disagree with my dear beloved father when I read about the teenage girl in Pakistan who's shot point blank in the head by a man invoking Allah and Muhammad because she wanted education. In the name of Allah and Muhammad, women are forbidden to drive. They're forbidden to own their own reproductive rights. They're forbidden to do anything unless they have permission from a male guardian. I disagree with my father that Islam is a religion of peace when I read these founding documents and I study the history and the example of the Prophet Muhammad. In there, I find an insistence of war and intolerance towards infidels, the hypocrites, those who associate God with others, homosexuals, women, and so on. What Islam needs is not a denial of these overwhelming and compelling facts. Islam needs a reformation. Muslim leaders who are serious about achieving true and enduring peace need to revise the Quran and the Hadith so that there is a consistency between what the peace-loving Muslims want and what their religion says. We are now in America. Imam Faisal Abdul Rauf here tonight likes to compare the American Constitution to Sharia law. The Constitution is only 225 years old, and it has been amended 27 times. The Quran is at least 1,200 years old. It has not been amended once. What a shame. It is urgent and imperative to start these amendments. It's time to innovate, innovate, innovate. And I will do, ladies and gentlemen, what I can do to help. Thank you.
Well, because Majid knows very well that
Majid is a believer. And believers are not allowed to contextualize the text.
Can I bring you back to my question? What about Martin
Is
Luther?
that really true?
If you were allowed to contextualize, you would say some of the things that Muhammad did is crap. You would say some of the things
Majid, is it true that you
great.
cannot?
So you contextualize.
Is that true?
No, it's not true. Now, can I say?
What do you think of Muhammad taking a 6-year-old as a bride? What do you think of that?
I don't think that's a particularly good idea. However, what I would say is that there are many, many people in history that...
What I do is I listen to the men, mostly they are men. There are some women, mostly men, who invoke the founding documents of Islam and the founding father of Islam. And I look at what they say and then I think, is that in the Quran? For instance, as you probably all know, I'm very much concerned about the subjection of women. So when I read a verse in the Quran that says that men are the maintainers of women and that husbands are allowed to hit their wives, I look at that verse in a way and I think you can read that in context, in its historical context, or you can apply it to our times. And the men who are doing that, who are applying all of these verses and the example of the Prophet Muhammad, not to the 7th century, but to our time, I find, and it's very unfortunate, but I find them to be far more influential in inspiring and mobilizing young men to see the religion of Islam the way they see it than the way either Imam Faisal says he sees it or Majid Nawaz says he sees it. And that's a fact. You know, you look at Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda does not use bin Laden to recruit new people. Al-Qaeda uses the Quran and the Prophet Muhammad to recruit young men. So that we have to stop this denial and at some point try and address the influence of these documents. And the way to do it is to, to look at what is in there and not deny it. It's just the denial that is so incredibly frustrating. I disagree with that. The reason why I disagree with it, it would be more accurate, Ziba, if you said the scholars that you find attractive say that. But there are a bunch of scholars with a great number of following in Islam, all of them are self-appointed, by the way, because there's no hierarchy, there's no seminary of Islam, except a University of Al-Azhar, and we know the products of Al-Azhar. But there are scholars like bin Laden
who say we have to take
He's not a scholar
the Quran.
by anyone's
Well, he
measure.
has the greatest following. He has
That's
the
not
greatest
true.
following. The Islamic Brotherhood,
It's
Hassan
really not
al-Banna. When you look at the Sunni Islam, when you look at Ayatollah Khomeini in the 20th century, the most influential guy of Shia Islam, another self-appointed scholar, you have all of it. Sheikh bin Baz, he has the greatest following. Sheikh al-Qaradawi. Maybe these are individuals that are not attractive to you, but then it would be more accurate if you stated that. They are attractive to many Muslims, not thousands, but in the millions. And what they say, and that's why they're influential, is they challenge every single Muslim individual. Are you a true Muslim? If you are a true Muslim, you live by what the Quran dictates, you follow the example of the Prophet
Right,
Muhammad.
their interpretation,
and those
though.
scholars who insist on that are far more influential, far more powerful than you
Ayaan, you just
soft-spoken,
quoted-
wonderful, cuddly scholars.
Well,
Is it the packaging, the marketing, or is it the substance? Okay. In America, in the Western world, there are continuous debates about the place of Muslims. And yes, amongst Muslims in the West and amongst Muslims outside of the West, there is this general belief that Islam is under siege and that Americans want to destroy Islam. That is a matter of perception because it's not supported by facts. Now, we look at Islam, and I look at Islamic countries like Pakistan, and they have blasphemy laws. Part of the constitution of Pakistan is derived from or founded on the Quran or the Hadith. The constitution of Iran is Islamic. The constitution of Saudi Arabia is the Quran. You look at movements like the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamists in the countries that have sprung up after the Arab Spring, and these movements want to organize society along religious lines. This conflation between politics and religion, this is not something that I am imagining. It's not a packaging problem. It's substantial. So when you give the example of the murderer of Yitzhak Rabin, he is a fringe. The state of Israel is not.
And he's in jail.
And he is in jail. And the Christian extremists here in the United States who take the Bible and then use it to kill people and hurt people, they are the fringe. But unfortunately, what we are seeing in Muslim countries is that the people who feel that they should be governed under the Sharia law are not a fringe. In some countries, they are a mainstream. In some countries, they are a minority. But in any case, it's a huge obstacle that cannot be ignored. And Islam can become a religion of peace if politics is divorced from religion, if science is divorced from religion. And for that, we need a reformation.
Well, when I try to define Islam as a religion, there is expression. What you find in the Quran is expression after expression, verse after verse, and also in the Hadith, that women are subordinate to men, that they have a guardian, they need to have a guardian. Their testimony is worth half of that of men. They can only inherit half of what their brother inherits. When it comes to sexual offenses, women are the ones who get, in reality, where Sharia is implemented, and that is not only the practical side of Islam, but also the fellowship side of Islam, everywhere where Sharia is implemented. And there are more places in the world today where Sharia as a family law is implemented, where it's not implemented on a political level, but in all of those places you see a subjugation of women. You see honor killings. You see women who are denied education. If you look on a global level, the levels of illiteracy among women in the Middle East is appalling. That's not something that I'm telling you because I'm, whatever, I misunderstand Islam, but that is report after report. And the latest one is the United Nations UNDP Human Development Report that was first published in 2002, and that was again published in 2003, 2004. And if you follow these reports, this is empirics. This is not something that I'm imagining. The situation of women in the Middle East, in Muslim countries, is dire. And the principles that underlie it and the practices are Islamic. It's Sharia law in action. And the appalling, the The nightmare is women who have fled those countries, who are now in the West, American citizens, European citizens, are subjected to parts of Sharia law. And Ziba, I think that denying that kind of, not just as a matter of debate, but I then try to question, where does your solidarity lie as a woman who grew up in a free country, a free woman, and as vocal as you are, shouldn't you be more solidar with them?
I am.
Ziba Khan.
I am.
I find enough verses in the Quran and in the Hadith and in the practice of Islam to show that as a woman in Islam, you have to have a male guardian, you don't own your sexuality, all the examples that I mentioned. So that is meat, it's substance. And when I call for a reformation, I am calling for an editing, a review of that, so that men who do not want to oppress women can find consistency within their scripture and the way they practice Islam. Right now, what you see when it comes to violence, whether it is against women or against religious minorities, or even Shias and Sunnis, what you see is there are peace-loving Muslims who are put in a position of cognitive dissonance. They want to live, and they do lead lives that are not consonant with what the Quran says and the example of the Prophet Muhammad. And I think the way forward is to stop the denial, the evasion, and to look at this and to modify it. We live in a country that allows us to do that. The United States is founded on innovation, and there's this enormous opportunity today for Muslims. As we look at the world that we were born in and the world we come from, there's this enormous opportunity here in the US to look at scripture in the eye and to innovate and to reform. And unless that is done, that dissonance is going to be there. And the people who invoke the verses and the practice of the Prophet to justify the subjection of women and to justify violence will always be there. So my message is, right now there is an opportunity for reform. I have this printed out, and I'm just waiting for that challenge that it's not in the Quran. You should go to a website called Islam, a Religion of Peace, and someone has documented 109 verses from the Quran and the Hadith. So in the world we live, the Quran is a small book, it can be read, and everyone can see what it says.
I'm only coming to you as the moderator on this question because I'm looking for clarity, but you could do the same thing with the Old Testament.
Oh, you can, but the Christians have gone through that. The Christians have had their inquisitions and their crusades and the witch burnings, and they are past that, so that violence is now an issue of the fringe. Islam is right in the middle of it, and a true leadership, a compassionate leadership who love Muslims would be a leadership that would now modify, innovate, and reform.
Islam, and we're saying there's a reason.
I'm afraid of being killed by apostates,
Yes,
and many of you who came here tonight came under unusual circumstances. I'm not in government. I'm not a powerful person. I'm a citizen. Just a normal, ordinary person.
Can you explain what you mean by unusual circumstances?
Unusual circumstances. You went through metal detectors to come to a debate in New York. Talk about Quakerism.
That's because it takes one person to get through those metal detectors and blow us up. It doesn't mean the majority of people are terrorists.
Let me finish. The people that I am protected against, and you as an audience too, the individual who wants to kill me because I'm an apostate of Islam is inspired to do that from the scripture of Islam, the example of the Prophet Muhammad, the clergy that preached to him, and the reward he will get in the hereafter that is promised in the Quran. All of that is Islamic. The sooner you admit that,
I'll tell you what he's inspired by.
The sooner you admit that, the sooner I can get rid of my bodyguards.
He's inspired. I'll tell you what he's inspired by. Yeah?
What can America do to help?
I have a request. America, since September 11, 2001, has been helping and focusing and picking, the leaders, those who say that Islam is a religion of peace, and who try to reinterpret it and who try to tell us what we want to hear. I want to say, please, Americans, whether it's politicians or civil society, there are now individuals, especially in those Arab Spring countries, women fighting for women's rights, homosexual Muslims fighting for their civil rights, religious minorities. These are the individuals and the groups that you need to help. They're floundering, they are under-resourced, and they are our allies when it comes to our value systems of individual freedom and conscience. They're the ones who need our help. We need to shift and start helping them.
I want to agree. Thank you so much for that question. I completely agree with you that women in the Muslim world today, not all of them, but most of them, are denied education. The reasons that are given by those who do the denying are Islamic. They refer to the concept of guardianship. So the guardian has the authority to decide whether he sends a girl to school or not, and for how long she goes to school. The main reason in Muslim countries where girls are sent to school, Muslim communities where girls are sent to school, the main reason for pulling them out at the age of menstruation is the fear, the terror that they might lose their virginity. That modesty, sexual modesty that is demanded of girls, which at first it preceded Islam, it was a tribal Arab culture elevated to religion in Islam, where people find within the Quran that in the Hadith, that insistency on her virginity, on her being a virgin on the night of her wedding, that is one of the main reasons that is given. And if sexual emancipation were to occur within the Muslim world, and I want to challenge a guy like Majid Nawaz to take the forefront as a man by saying that you value a partner, a human being, more than her hymen, that would revolutionize Islam completely. It would take, girls would go to school, they would be independent, they would be able to articulate what their rights are, and more importantly, they could make Islam a religion of peace because they would bring their boys up to be employable, to be educated, and to renounce suicide, killings, and martyrdom. Uneducated mothers are mothers whose children, whose boys, bad guys can take advantage of. From those of you who are familiar with history, and I think a crowd like this is, you know that no monotheistic religion can be a religion of peace. No monotheistic religion is a religion of peace. And definitely not Islam. Monotheistic religions know periods, lengthy periods of peace, but they also know lengthy periods of war. In terms of practice, yes, in Islam, you practice charity, you go to Hajj, you pray, all of that. But in terms of practice, there's also the expression, there's the concept of jihad. And I find it a pity that Ziba Khan did not mention that concept, which is central to Islam's conquests and Islam's success. The founder of Islam, Muhammad, in his lifetime, conducted 65 campaigns of war that were all successful. And that militaristic history of Islam is well documented. Just go Google it. And if you don't find it on Google, go to all those former empires that were conquered. The combination of a history of empire, of conquest, also leaves a legacy behind. And that legacy is the thrusting together of people of different ethnicities, languages, etc. So even if that empire declines, the likelihood of conflict, of war, is probable, it's high, especially where there is a fault line. That's where Samuel Huntington had a point. That history of militarism, combined with the legacy of empire, those 2 points alone belie the motion tonight that Islam is a religion of peace. But that's not all. When empires decline, those who are defeated, and the Muslim empire declined, those who are defeated sometimes find themselves in a state of victimhood. That state of victimhood is exploited by the leadership or those self-appointed leaders of Islam. And what do you see? You see a number of people, and I concede it's a minority, who believe that Islam is under siege. A mentality of victimhood tells those who are conquered, who are vanquished, that the problem was caused by external powers, not by us, and that systematic denial within Islam after the 19th century to blame only outsiders, exempt Islam from blame, from the explanation what went wrong. Yes, it was external. Yes, Muslims were humiliated. Yes, they were conquered. Yes, they were colonized. But how much was also because of the flaws of Islam? And that takes me to the point of absolutism. When the West went into its scientific revolution, why wasn't it Muslims? Muslims were the first scientists, arithmetic, logic, etc. They were great. Why didn't they get into that scientific revolution? Why were they left behind? Was it only because of external factors, or were there internal flaws? Islam is not a religion of peace, and I woke up to the facts on the 11th of September 2001. Perhaps I should have woken up to the facts earlier, but I admit that I did that then at that time. Talking to people of my faith, Islam, and my friends, and discussing with them, I remember all kinds of fallacious arguments, but I remember one consistent thing, and that was to exempt Islam from any criticism. It was culture, it wasn't Islam. But a religion is born in a culture, and if that culture is not peaceful, then that religion is not peaceful. I was told it's politics. We've heard it tonight many times. It's not the religion. But Islam not only has a pious dimension, but it also has a political dimension, a complex system of laws, a political philosophy on how society should be organized. And if you look at that political system, it's anything but peaceful. What emancipated me from the order to submit my will completely to Allah, which in practice means the concentration of power in the hands of a few, was to learn to think critically, the Enlightenment. Vote against this motion and open up the flows of Islam for debate in order that Muslims, those who are not yet emancipated, may take charge of their own reason, of their own faculty. Vote against the motion that Islam is a religion of peace, and toss that fallacy into the trash can of history. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayaan Hirsi. All right. It's all in now. I've been given the results. Remember, the team that changes the most minds is declared our winner, and here it is. Our motion is Islam is a religion of peace. Before the debate, 41% were for the motion, 25% were against, and 34% were undecided. After the debate, 36% are for the motion, 55% against, 9% undecided. The side against the motion wins. Congratulations to them.